Mike Harris leaned back in his creaky office chair, savoring the first sip of his morning coffee. The rich, bitter aroma filled the small room, mingling with the faint hum of the station's fluorescent lights. It was the calm before the storm, or so he thought. Suddenly, the door burst open, slamming against the wall with a loud bang. Officer Daniels stood in the doorway, his face pale and his breath uneven. "Mike, we've got a situation in the interrogation room. You're not gonna believe this," he said, the urgency in his voice slicing through the quiet like a knife. Mike's heart sank. He set his coffee down with a sigh, the warmth of it already forgotten. "What is it this time?" he asked, bracing himself. Daniels hesitated, as if unsure how to put it into words. "Two women, fighting over a baby. Each of them swears it's theirs." Mike blinked, his mind racing. "A baby? In here?" "Yeah," Daniels nodded, running a hand through his hair. "Neither will back down, and they're making a scene. Chief wants you to handle it." Mike groaned, pushing his chair back with a creak. "Of course he does," he muttered under his breath, grabbing his badge and straightening his uniform. He followed Daniels down the hall, his boots echoing on the linoleum floor. When he entered the room, the scene was even more chaotic than Daniels had described. The two women were standing just feet apart, their faces flushed with anger. One of them clutched a torn hospital wristband, waving it like a banner of proof, while the other held a worn photograph close to her chest. "She's my baby. I gave birth to her," the woman with the wristband shouted, her voice trembling with fury. "No, you're lying," the other woman fired back, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I've raised her since the day she was born. She's mine." Mike's gaze fell to the newborn cradled in his arms. The tiny girl was asleep, her delicate face calm and unbothered by the chaos erupting around her. He could feel the weight of her innocence, her vulnerability, as if it were a physical burden pressing on his chest. "All right, enough," Mike finally shouted, his voice firm enough to cut through the noise. "If you both keep screaming, you're not helping anyone, least of all her." The women fell silent, their eyes locking on him as if he held the answers they so desperately sought. Mike looked at them both, his gut churning. Their stories seemed equally heartfelt, their pain equally real. How could he possibly determine who was telling the truth? How could he make a choice that wouldn't destroy one of them? He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "We'll figure this out," he said firmly, "but not like this. Sit down, both of you." The women hesitated before reluctantly obeying, their glares still sharp but their voices momentarily quiet. Mike turned his attention back to the baby, her tiny fingers curling in her sleep. Time was running out, and the weight of the decision ahead felt heavier than anything he'd faced before. What would he do? Who could he trust? As the clock ticked, Mike knew one thing for certain: whatever choice he made, would he rely on evidence? Trust his instincts? Or was there another way to uncover the truth? The room fell silent, save for the soft breath of the baby and the ticking of the clock on the wall. Mike stared at the two women, his mind racing. The answer had to be somewhere, but where? The story hangs in the balance. What would you do in Officer Harris's position? Let us know in the comments, and stay tuned to see how this heart-wrenching tale unfolds. Mike ran a hand down his face, his thoughts spinning. The room felt heavy with tension, every second stretching like hours. He needed a plan, something that would get him closer to the truth. "All right," Mike said, his voice calm but commanding. "Let's start at the beginning. I need each of you to tell me your side of the story one at a time. No interruptions." The women exchanged icy glares before the one with the hospital wristband spoke up. Her voice quivered, but her words were steady. "My name is Rachel Carter," she said, clutching the wristband tightly. "I gave birth to her at Memorial Hospital 3 days ago. But when I woke up, she was gone. The nurses told me someone took her. I didn't even get a chance to hold her." Her voice broke, tears streaming down her face. "And now, she's here, in her arms?" Rachel pointed angrily at the other woman. "She's mine." "I know she is." Mike nodded, jotting down notes in his pad. He turned to the second woman. "Your turn." The other woman sat up straighter, her eyes burning with defiance. "I'm Sandra Vega," she said. "I've been taking care of this baby since the day she was born. I was at the hospital too, but I adopted her. I have paperwork to prove it." She pulled out a crumpled manila envelope from her purse, holding it up triumphantly. "She's my daughter now, legally and in every way that matters." Rachel scoffed, her voice rising again. "That's a lie. You stole her. That paperwork doesn't mean anything. Sandra shot back, her voice laced with anger. I didn't steal anything. You abandoned her. They told me you left her there, and they needed someone to take care of her. So I did. Mike raised a hand, silencing them both. Enough, he said, his tone sharp. This is getting us nowhere. Rachel, do you have any proof she's your biological child? Rachel hesitated, her fingers tightening around the wristband. I don't have a DNA test if that's what you mean. But I have this. It's my hospital band, it matches hers. She gestured toward the baby, her voice pleading. Mike glanced at Sandra. Sandra opened the envelope and handed over a stack of papers. Mike flipped through them, his brow furrowing. The adoption appeared legitimate, but something about it didn't sit right with him. The tension in the room grew thicker as Mike set the papers down. The baby stirred in his arms, her tiny face scrunching before relaxing again. He leaned back against the wall, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This wasn't just about facts, it was about a life. A child caught between two desperate women, each with their own version of the truth. Mike's mind churned. There had to be a way to get to the bottom of this without making a rushed decision. Maybe there was someone at the hospital who could clarify things, or a deeper investigation into the adoption paperwork. But time was slipping away, and the longer he waited, the more volatile the situation became. Mike looked at both women, his voice steady but firm. Here's what's going to happen, he said. We're going to take this step by step. I'll reach out to the hospital to verify both of your claims. Until we have answers, the baby stays here safe. Rachel's face crumpled with despair. You can't take her from me again, she cried. Sandra's expression hardened. And you can't just erase everything I've done for her. Mike raised his hand again. I'm not taking sides. My priority is what's best for this child. And until I'm sure, I'm not making any decisions. The women fell silent, though their anger and desperation lingered in the air. Mike turned and left the room, carrying the baby with him. As he walked down the hallway, the weight of her tiny body felt heavier with every step. He needed answers, and fast, because no matter how this ended, someone was going to leave with a broken heart. What would he uncover next? Could the hospital provide the clarity he needed, or would the truth remain just out of reach? Mike returned to his office with the baby in his arms, her soft breathing a sharp contrast to the storm raging outside the room. He gently placed her in the portable crib the station kept for emergencies. As he watched her sleep, he felt the crushing weight of his responsibility. He sat back down at his desk, phone in hand, and dialed the hospital. As the line rang, his mind raced with the women's conflicting stories. Just as he was about to give up, a voice crackled on the other end. Memorial Hospital, this is Nurse Abby speaking. How can I help you? Hi, this is Officer Mike Harris, he said, his voice steady but urgent. I'm calling about a situation involving a newborn. 2 women are claiming to be her mother, and I need to verify some details about her birth from 3 days ago. There was a pause, followed by a sigh. Oh, I was afraid this might come up, Nurse Abby said. Let me grab the records. Hold on. Mike raised an eyebrow. That wasn't the response he expected. Before he could ask what she meant, the door to his office swung open, and a familiar face peeked inside. Mike, you busy? Detective Elena Cruz asked, stepping into the room. She was sharp, no nonsense, and one of the best investigators in the department. Her dark eyes immediately landed on the baby. What's going on here? You running a daycare now? Mike motioned for her to come in, covering the phone's receiver. I could use your help. Elena, 2 women are fighting over this baby, each claiming she's theirs. I've got Nurse Abby from the hospital on the line, but something feels off. Elena crossed her arms and leaned against the desk. Fighting over a baby? Sounds messy. Let me guess, both have proof, but neither story adds up. Exactly, Mike said with a grim nod. One says she gave birth, the other says she adopted. Both have paperwork, but something doesn't feel right. Elena smirked. Let me guess, you're playing referee. More like detective, Mike muttered. Just then, Nurse Abby came back on the line. Officer Harris? I have the records here, she said. The baby you're talking about, she was reported missing from our nursery 3 days ago. We've been cooperating with CPS and the police on this case. Mike's grip on the phone tightened. Missing? So Rachel Carter's story might check out? It's possible, Abby admitted. But there's more. There was another woman, someone matching the description of the second claimant. She came in that same day with papers claiming to have adopted the baby, but there were irregularities with her documents. We were in the process of reporting it when she left with the child. Mike felt a jolt of anger, and no one thought to alert the police immediately. We tried, Abby said defensively, but she disappeared before we could file a full report. I can fax over everything we have, including the baby's original birth certificate. Do that, Mike said, his voice firm. Send it to the precinct. Attention to me. As he hung up, Elena raised an eyebrow. Sounds like Sandra Vega's adoption story has holes. What's next? Mike sighed. I'm going to need to bring CPS into this. If Sandra took the baby under false pretenses, this could turn into a criminal case. But I can't rule Rachel out completely yet. We need to confirm her claim with a DNA test. Elena nodded thoughtfully. I'll help you run background checks on both of them. If Sandra's adoption papers are fake, there's bound to be a trail. And if Rachel's story has holes, we'll find those too. Before Mike could respond, there was a knock on the door. A young man in a rumpled suit stepped in, holding a briefcase. He looked nervous but determined. Excuse me, I'm Liam Porter, he said, clearing his throat. I'm an attorney. I heard about the situation with the baby, and I represent Sandra Vega. Elena shot Mike a look. And here comes the cavalry. Mike gestured for Liam to sit. We haven't made any decisions yet. We're still gathering evidence. Liam nodded, his fingers fidgeting with the latch on his briefcase. I understand, Officer Harris. I just wanted to say that my client is deeply committed to this child. She has the legal right to custody, and she's willing to fight for it. Before Mike could respond, another knock came, and the door creaked open again. This time, it was a tall, gray-haired man with piercing blue eyes and a badge on his belt. Detective Arnold Jenkins, Child Protective Services Liaison, he introduced himself. His voice was calm but commanding. I heard about the situation. We've been investigating the disappearance of this baby from Memorial Hospital, and I thought I'd lend my expertise. Mike blinked. The room was quickly filling with characters, each adding another layer to an already complicated case. All right, Mike said, rubbing his temples. Let's sort this out. Jenkins, I'll need any reports CPS has on the baby or either of these women. Elena, you're with me on the background checks. And Liam, he glanced at the nervous lawyer. If your client wants to fight this in court, she'll need to explain the irregularities in her paperwork. Liam nodded, though his expression faltered slightly. Of course. As the room quieted, the baby let out a soft coo, as if to remind them all of what was at stake. Mike looked around at the faces before him, each holding a piece of the puzzle. The truth was out there, but unraveling it would take every ounce of skill and determination they had. What would they uncover next? Would the case bring clarity or more chaos? Detective Jenkins wasted no time. He placed a stack of CPS documents on Mike's desk, flipping to a report detailing the baby's disappearance. This should clear things up, he said, pointing to an incident log. Sandra Vega filed her adoption paperwork, but the hospital flagged it for inconsistencies. When they tried to verify it, Sandra left abruptly with the child. Mike frowned, flipping through the documents. So she didn't complete the adoption process legally? That's correct, Jenkins replied, and Rachel Carter's claim checks out. She gave birth to the baby, and the hospital confirmed her as the biological mother. Elena tapped her pen against the desk. So, Rachel's the mother, and Sandra took the baby under false pretenses. That put Sandra in a tough spot legally. Just as Mike was about to respond, Liam, Sandra's lawyer, raised his hand. Wait, before we rush to judgment, you need to understand Sandra's side. She didn't steal the baby out of malice. She was desperate. Sandra can't have children of her own. And when she saw the baby abandoned in the hospital. Abandoned? Mike interrupted, his voice sharp. Yes, Liam said, nervously adjusting his tie. Sandra was told the mother, Rachel, had left the hospital without the baby and didn't plan to return. That's why she filed for adoption in the first place. Rachel's voice, shaking with emotion, broke the tension. She had quietly entered the room after overhearing the conversation. That's not true. I passed out after giving birth. When I woke up, they told me my baby was gone. I would never abandon her. The room fell silent as the weight of Rachel's words sank in. Mike stood and looked at Sandra. Is that true? Did someone tell you the baby was abandoned? Sandra hesitated, her eyes darting between the baby and the people in the room. Tears welled up in her eyes. Yes, she whispered. That's what I was told. I thought I was giving her a loving home. I never meant to hurt anyone. Mike sighed, his shoulders heavy with the complexity of the situation. "This is a mess," he said. "But one thing is clear, the baby's biological mother is Rachel. Legally, the child belongs with her." Sandra broke down, tears streaming down her face. "But I love her like she's my own. Please, don't take her from me." Rachel, clutching the hospital wristband, stared at Sandra. Her anger began to soften as she saw the genuine pain in Sandra's eyes. "I can't imagine losing her again," Rachel said quietly. "But maybe we can work something out. She's my daughter, but she's been with you too. Maybe there's a way for you to still be in her life." Sandra looked up, her face streaked with tears. You'd let me be part of her life?" Rachel nodded slowly. "She deserves all the love she can get, as long as we do what's best for her." The tension in the room eased, and Mike felt a flicker of hope. "That's a decision you both have to make," he said. "But it sounds like you're on the right path." In the days that followed, Rachel was officially reunited with her daughter, with the help of a family counselor. She and Sandra worked out a shared arrangement, giving the baby the love of two mothers. Sandra apologized for her mistakes and committed to supporting Rachel in raising the child. Moral of the story: the story of Rachel and Sandra teaches us that love is not about possession, but about putting someone else's needs above your own. It's a reminder that understanding, forgiveness, and cooperation can turn even the most painful conflicts into opportunities for healing and growth. When faced with tough decisions, compassion can often reveal solutions that serve everyone involved.